I wonder how the Homestuck gang, mainly the Homestuck kids, the Alpha and Beta kids, would translate into Final Fantasy XIV's jobs. Now, let's see. Let's start with the easier one that I can think of. Dave, the good old Strider Classic. Obviously, he would be samurai, but at the same time, later he becomes a paladin of sorts, if you can think about it. I mean, honestly, the instant that he gets his god tier, he pretty much turns into a paladin of sorts. He abstains from using his time powers, unless it's solely to be used for protecting his friends, and even then he's stubborn about it, keeping a sort of oath of sorts, if you know what I mean. But before then, he was being trained by his brother to be a sort of ninja samurai sort of deal, mainly samurai with a little bit of ninja sprinkled in. So I'd say in terms of Final Fantasy XIV levels, as of November, when it's 6.2 still out and the max level is still 90, I think last time I checked, he would be, let's see, about level. Okay, let's say the paladin. Dave would be a main paladin. Dave would main paladin. He would have a level 90 paladin, and he offhands samurai. It's not as high as paladin, because once, let's say, the equivalent of the big shit happening involving Homestuck equaling to the big shit that happens in Final Fantasy XIV at around Heaven's Word start, at around level 50 or so, he probably drops Samurai for Paladin, which is unfortunate because you can't really get Samurai until you get to level 50 in the first place, so really, he's only a Samurai in name alone. But we're not here to speak of semantics, we're just here to have a good time. Anyway, next one that is a little interesting is good old Johnny Boy, John Man, the Egbert. Now, there is no hammer combat class, but the closest that I can think of is Warrior. I mean, he really is just using a Warhammer, and there really ain't that a huge of a difference between Warrior's moves if you replace the War Axe, with a Warhammer. I mean, minus the fact that you're not doing slicing and hacking damage, you're doing blunt force trauma, which honestly I think is probably cooler, I'll be honest. So yeah, John is a full-on main tank. Hell yeah, you love to see it. Now, onward to Rose, sure. So, Rose is also interesting because when I see her needles and whatnot, it reminded me of Sage. Unfortunately, Sage is not something you can really get until you're what, level something. I don't even fucking remember. I never even unlocked Sage in Final Fantasy XIV yet. But I think they start out at 60, 70, but just like the whole samurai situation with Dave, I'm gonna forego how the game does it because fuck you. But I will say that she probably starts off as a black mage. That makes sense, right? She starts off as a black mage, you know, goes through a good amount of most of the game, both in Homestuck and probably in Final Fantasy XIV as a black mage. It isn't until the sort of halfway point where she, again, just like Dave, gets her god tier, and she sort of moves from being a evil, sort quote unquote evil mage, a cackly mage, to a actual seer of light. So, let's say that Rose mains Sage, which is the healer, and offhands Black Mage at around the same level. Sage is going to be at max level, while Black Mage is going to be 10 levels lower for Rose. Now, let's see, for Jade. Jade's interesting because, again, the difference between, for most of the Homestuck kids, the difference between before and after God tier is pretty significant. Minus, of course, Johnny Boy, the one we just mentioned. The difference between one and the other, like Dave going from Samurai to Paladin, Rose going from Black Mage to Sage, it's a pretty big jump in terms of, you know, how you think of it in game. Essentially, both of them go from a DPS, selfish role, like Samurai and Black Mage, ironically, the two most high damaging, but also super fucking selfish classes in terms of their abilities in Final Fantasy XIV. But then they go from the most selfish to support roles, a tank and a healer, which I think is pretty apropos. But with Jade, I don't fucking know. Here's the problem, right? There are 3 out of the 8 kids use guns, or have used guns, or still use guns in their repertoire. So, unfortunately, the only things that have guns is Gunbreaker, which is, you know, I don't think I see any of the characters being a Gunbreaker, I'll be honest, except maybe one. And Machinist. And Machinist is, well, I mean, they use guns, they use a wide array of stuff. Blunderbuss, their carbine, they summon rooks and shit like that. They use technology, in other words. So, I think the only people this would sort of match with is the Harleys, because they're a lot about technology and whatnot. But again, there is a difference between before and after God tier for almost everybody. And that is no exception with Jade. So before God tier, she was a machinist. She was smart and all that, so it makes sense. Once she God tiers, and hear me out on this, because it's a bit of a leap, but I think she turns into a sort of, you know, sci-fi space monk of sorts. I mean, honestly, how many times do you see her use a gun after she gets God tiered? Of course, she doesn't really do a whole lot, because then they sit around on a fucking planet and do fuck all for the next 3 years, and we don't get to see shit of any of their combat prowess until she gets hypnotized and mind destroyed by the condense, but whatever. Overall, she would be monk. I think she would main monk at the end of, this is talking about from the end, at the end of Homestuck, what would their characters be? Jade would be max level monk, and let's say about a level 60 machinist, just after Heaven's Word, and around the middle of Final Fantasy XIV story, the end of Heaven's Word, the start of Stormblood. That's, yeah, sure. Now let's go on to the other batch of kids. Woo. Anyway, Jane. I think there's so many different J's. I just, ugh. But Jane, she starts and ends as a sort of a not pseudo. She is a support. Her whole thing is life, and so naturally I'm gonna attribute her to White Mage. Her whole thing with the fucking staff or the trident or whatever the fuck she wields, the fork, I don't know. But it sort of looks like a White Mage staff, and she acts like it's a White Mage staff, and a lot of the things both in canon and in fan ventures show that she's essentially a healer class, since she is the life aspect. So White Mage is pretty appropriate. So I say that from start to finish, she is a White Mage. Even when she gets corrupted, it's still sort of, the whole thing with White Mage in Final Fantasy XIV is that they have a certain job gauge called Lilies, and I'm just gonna imagine that when she gets mind controlled, she gets turned into the Blood Lily part of the White Mage skill kit, where she starts being really fucking angsty and shit. I don't know that much about it. I'm not a White Mage main. I only have him at level like 60. But anyway, from start to finish, just like Not at all surprising enough, both of the Egberts both begin and end as the same class as they started out with. Because I guess you could call them basic, but at the same time, that basicness is pretty nice. It's nice and predictable. You don't gotta wonder what the fuck they're gonna be on about now. Now, onward to, I don't know, Dirk? Maybe? Sure. Let's just go Dirk, because he's simple. He is literally samurai. Samurai and ninja. No. Yes. No. Potentially. No. Yes. He mains samurai through and through. He has, I think... No, he both mains and offhand samurai. They're both at max level, but he's comfortable with samurai. That's just a no-brainer for a lot of it. And only ninja, because I feel like it would be remiss to not mention the amount of times that old man bro wanted Dave to be a ninja sort of deal. So obviously he would have a high level of ninjas. So yeah. Dirk, max level samurai, offhands ninja, also max level. Now, on to Roxy, which is another fucking weird thing, because we're getting now into the two people next up who are both machinists. Because if you remember, Roxy's main weapon is a sniper rifle. Sort of essentially the same type of rifle kind as Jade. So, really, you gotta put two and two together. And I don't think Roxy really changes how she behaves. She doesn't really change her specubus throughout the series, other than to use it once and then drop it. Like, she uses her fists, and then she goes and uses the sword, uses the unbreakable katana from Old Man Bro's dead corpse. So you gotta think, what does she work as? How does she work? And honestly, I don't know. I'm honestly at a loss, because she is odd. Very, very odd. I think if I had to pin down 1 to 2 classes that she would be, it would probably have to be machinist, naturally. Crossed with... If I say samurai again, I'm gonna be a little upset at myself. But if I say monk, then it's gonna be the same damn thing. You know what? I got it. Just due to her personality, she's bard. She's machinist and bard, and since they're both physical range DPS in the game, there's not that much of a clash. She sort of stays as the same sort of deal, only she becomes more part of the group instead of dealing with her own whatevers, just like in the book, I think. I don't remember, nor do I care enough to check. But yeah, mainly goes machinist, but is also bard. Let's say both of them are at max level and she flips to one or the other whenever she damn well feels like it. Now, last but not least is Jake. Jakey boy. So, of course, again, machinist. He uses dual guns, and he doesn't really stop using dual guns, unfortunately, because Hussey is an asswipe, and also they shafted the shit out of pages in general. We don't get to see a goddamn thing about how Jake actually fights in a non-stupid manner. So, we don't really have an idea of how he would fight, or if he would fight in a different way than a machinist. I could be facetious and kind of funny and say he kind of offhands his dancer, but I feel like that would not be a good idea. So I won't be doing that. He is not offhand dancer, but he's probably full on machinist. Just simply because his infatuation with guns is probably the only thing that's got going for him. He's a machinist that's a little farther behind, but just same as max level as everyone else. But he's full-on machinist, not machinist monk, not machinist bard, just machinist classic. Alright, So, this is interesting. So, now, at the end of this, I'm going to bring it all together and think, how in the world are we going to bring this back? Because, guess what? These are 8 characters. And guess how much a full party in Final Fantasy XIV has? Oh yeah, 8. So, now I gotta think, did I divvy up enough? Because the composition for a full party is 2 tanks, 2 healers, and 4 DPS. Now, we know we have the tanks covered through John and Dave. Dave being Paladin, John being a warrior. We have the healers covered with Sage going to Rose and White Mage going to Jade. No, Jane, sorry. So many J's. But this is also a good thing as well, by the way, that we have both a regen healer, White Mage, and a barrier healer as Sage. This is good. This is good. Unintended, but good. Now, do we have a good range of damage? Fuck no, we don't. We got melee and physical range DPS. We have no magical range, but that's okay. That's not really important, because the rest of them being melee DPS or physical range DPS, as long as they're just damage, then we're already good. You got yourself a monk, a samurai, a bard, and a machinist. That's pretty decent. Admittedly, actually, never mind, wait a minute. The only ones giving out a good amount of support is bard and machinist, and a little bit of monk. Samurai ain't bringing shit but high deeps. And other than the samurai and maybe monk, machinist and bard are not going to be dealing that much damage. You want high damage, you go samurai, reaper, or black mage. But unfortunately, the only person who knows black magic is also trying to do double duty and be a secondary healer, which is needed. So there you go. For any and all, you know, future projects, that's the super ultra definitive version of how the main 8 Homestuck kids will be if they transfer over to Final Fantasy XIV. And anyway, yeah, that's it. This is a late night thing I decided to record because if I just wanted to do it, that's all. I'm using a fucking headset. I'm not using my usual mic because I don't feel like setting it up for something stupid like this. It's only gonna take 18 fucking minutes. Anyway, see y'all later.